isso, e aí, como tem a receita tarde, tem 10 pessoas inscritas, algumas coisas as pessoas terão oportunidade de poder colocar nas respostas, e a gente pode continuar mais tarde. A ideia é deixar um espaço razoável para as pessoas fazerem perguntas,
Então não vai precisar?
Não, acho que não.
Sim, mas também para liberar as pessoas para aula, porque a gente pediu para alguns vídeos ali.
Mas foi uma comida de bom amigo. Eu achei que eu tinha tirado todas as fontes que não são fontes comuns, mas essa...
O que acaba acontecendo sem os monitores, os TAs, que dão a parte da tarde, eles não vêm para cá. Então eles já ficam aqui fora que tem aula. Então junta as duas coisas, né? Tem que desocupar e os caras já estão lá na sala esperando. O
problema é que aqui a gente apresentando, tipo,
a gente normalmente
fica meio longe, mas fica atrás da gente. Então ou vai lá, aí eu não sei se o controlinho pega lá.
Tá bom,
mas quando tiver uma apresentação,
eu apresento vocês com eu não sei,
por exemplo,
eu posso apresentar vocês com os professores.
Você fala uma coisa
Não, isso aqui, ó, o laser.
Em vez de usar o laser, talvez a gente possa...
Aí o Marcos está aqui
mostrando assim.
Mas acho que quando está com a apresentação,
que a gente
olha lá. Ai, tá vendo?
Pô, ali a gente vai começar
Na verdade, a gente tenta ser menos formal. Então, assim, normalmente eu deixaria vocês apresentarem esse tipo da estrutura e tal. Se dizer, ó, vamos começar, os pesquisadores estão aqui, vamos falar e tal. Uma coisa mais solta, assim, que é para ser mais solta. Funcionou muito bem uma que aconteceu, é que o formato de vocês é naturalmente diferente, mas em que os professores combinaram uma apresentação conjunta e para cada tópico que eles abordavam, eles abriam uma pergunta. Então eles não deixaram tanto fim, eles foram fazer. Nunca tinha visto isso aqui, nunca tinha acontecido desse jeito, funcionou super bem. Mas de vocês de outra natureza, não é para ser assim.
O Sérgio foi para a gente falar um pouco dos bancos de dados que a gente tem. A gente tem uma apresentação mais ou menos, uma ideia geral do que é o número, desculpa falar especificamente dos bancos de dados. O Marcelo
mas vai ser pouca coisa para você. Esse tá mas conforme você vai falando, ele vai aparecer sozinho, então não fica preocupado, porque não vai encher. Deixa eu ver se eu consigo.
Como é uma escola de médico, a gente tem gente que
ela aparece tipo uma coisa aqui em que eu cuido das transições, mas esse aqui não tá aparecendo. Uma tela.
Para interessar mais gente, assim, tem um tanto de apoio, tem que ser via banco de dados mesmo.
As questões mais substantivas eu acho que 30 minutos vocês querem um pouco de cada, porque a gente tem que fazer uma profissão teórica e teórica que a gente está trabalhando. Então a gente vai só apresentar, mas sincero
Então, só não sei, eu vou até ali, só para ver se o controle funciona bem no modo apresentação. Eu vou ficar mais distante, só para ver se quiser mudar. Eu vou mexer. Pega aqui se você quiser postar o seu.
Tudo bem, ou vai. Fazendo cima de novo, certo?
Não sei, não.
É porque eu não sabia, tá? Foi que curso. E aí?
Desenhar mais. É bom. Mas é muito conteúdo para mais ou menos.
Em geral, quando o professor vem pela primeira vez, é o tipo de coisa que acontece isso. Se ele precisa sentir, aí ele fica na dúvida, aí ele peca por excesso, né? Porque na dúvida ele fala, bom, mas já chegar lá não dá nada, eles estavam reclamando.
Não, mas ela é excelente. Ela é muito disposta, ela está realmente preocupada em que ela seja bastante. Mas é difícil cobrir tudo e ela põe muita dificuldade. Eu acho que agora ela vai aprender a modular.
Entendi. Bom, a monitora estava falando da parte da tarde, eles lá fizeram longos. Mas melhorou, mudou alguma coisa? Assim, não, continua assim.
Não, eu acho que deu uma. Acho que foi factível, a gente conseguiu terminar, e hoje tem uma atividade mais gráfica, aplicar questionário.
Ótimo, sabe?
Você quer ficar no meio aí? Não?
Eu tava falando a gente faz de um formato um tanto mais informal, assim. Eu não apresento vocês formalmente, como pensador de núcleo, vocês ficam à vontade para se apresentar se quiserem, enfim, detalhar o fato, como acharem melhor para se apresentar. Porque é para ser mais... Esse é menos formal. O mais formal são seminários que acontecem no fim da tarde, então aqui é para ser mais...
É mais uma conversa.
É mais um bate-papo mesmo. Enfim, e aí vocês, se quiserem abrir para perguntar antes, durante a apresentação, vocês também ficam à vontade. Se vocês, o formato, vamos falar primeiro e depois também, se vocês vão achar. Vamos esperar mais um pouquinho, e a gente começa. Mais 5 minutos. Tá?
A greve afetou muito
os caras... Não, presença eu não senti, mas o atraso. Teve atraso, o pessoal chegou atrasado. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's start for another info session in this second week of our summer school. This time we got the pleasure to receive here researchers from the Center for the Study of Violence here from University of São Paulo. Thank you very much for coming. Here we got 3 of them, Marcelo, Ariadne, Renan. Professor Marcos Alvarez is also one of the main researchers from the center. Now let's start their presentation. You got around 30-40 minutes, then we open to the floor for questions. Thank you again, and the word is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of Professor Sérgio Adorno and also Marcos Alvarez that is here, I'd like to take the invitation and the opportunity for us to talk about our work to the summer school audience. To us is a great opportunity. So we are going to divide this presentation in 3 parts. I will talk a little bit about NEVE history and our current research problem, and Renan will talk about their main lines of research, the data that we already collect, how we're going to explore and try to give answers to the problems that are going to present here, and mainly in the data that we are collecting ourselves. And Marcelo will talk a little bit about how we are working with secondary data and how we're changing them and transform them into something more cool. So the Center for the Study of Violence, we call NEVE, because in Portuguese it's Núcleo de Estudos da Violência. We're gonna talk NEVE all the time, but it's the Center for the Study of Violence. It was created 30 years ago by Professor Paulo Pinheiro from Political Science Department, and by Sérgio Adorno, that is from Sociology Department. And it was created as an interdisciplinary center. So it's not linked to any department in particular. We have researchers from different backgrounds. And as a center to study issues related to democracy, human rights, and violence. And since the beginning, NEVE have developed applying research about security and justice institutions, and also about the persistence of an authoritarian legacy in the process of Brazilian democratization. And what we call authoritarian legacy is related to the violence and intolerance and things there is in the behavior of the society, as well as the ones that hold the power. So, and over time, NEVE has worked with a wide variety of research methods, such as surveys, qualitative interviews, and documentary research, and also with a wide variety of data sources, like newspapers, court records, and official data. And we try to bring together researchers from different fields of knowledge and with different backgrounds. So political science, sociology, and anthropology, law, geography, psychology, epidemiology, and statistics. So we are like a group of very diverse people. And in the year of 2000, NEVE was selected as a FAPESP CEPID center, as a center to research and do not only research, but also innovation and knowledge transfer. And we have been working like with this founding. This was the first round of the founding that found us for almost 10 years. And the results of this first round of research, this long-term research, points out the persistence of gross human rights violation, the difficulties to consolidate the rule of law in Brazil, low levels of interpersonal and institutional trust, and in addition, the research also points out that people that live in different backgrounds and different patterns of human era, they develop a diverse understanding of law and authorities. And these are some of the questions that we decide to explore in the second round of research. So since 2012, NEVE was selected again in a second round of CEPID FAPESP funding. And this is currently our main sourcing of funds. Our present research investigates what are the predictors and the consequences of legitimacy of key institutions for democracy. So legitimacy is our key concept of research. And legitimacy is important not only by when we think about the state, or the relationship between the citizen and the state. But legitimacy actually is important in any relationship that involves the exercise of power in the contemporary world. We can think about the relations between the police and citizens, but also between like teachers and students, between parents and children. Any relationship there is like power involved, the legitimacy of those who exercise power is something to consider, especially when you think about democratic societies. And legitimacy is relevant to both, to those who exercise power on daily basis, and also for those who are subject to this, in this power relationship. And we are talking about the relations that are more than just naked power. We are talking about relations that have some kind of balance. We're talking about the contemporary world, when a person cannot like exercise power without any kind of strings attached. So And legitimacy as a question, as an interesting, arises precisely when those who hold the power need to justify the position that they are at. And is only valid when it generates voluntary submission for those who are involved in this relationship. So to make it clear, we understand as a concept legitimacy as the recognition to the right to exercise power. And our assumptions is that in the contemporary world, legitimacy power is more than just legality. It's more than just a power that is conquered and exercised according to a certain rules. Legitimacy, to be considered legitimate, a power also must be exercised according to certain values and with the consent of those who submit. So there is a lot of things that have to be present to a relationship of power could be considered legitimate. So it's not enough to authority to ensure obedience, because obedience can be achieved through coercion. And this is our research, the findings of our research has been showing that coercion is one of, a lot of people obey authorities in Brazil because of fear of consequences and not because they recognize the power as legitimate. And this is a sign of problem. This is a sign that probably the authority is not legitimate the way we understand it's supposed to be. So when authorities obey more doing fear than doing recognition, we cannot say that they hold a legitimate power. And so why this question is important to us, to the Center for the Study of Violence, why this is it's so important that became a key concept in our research. Because we understand that a legitimate authority has less need to apply coercive resource to maintain itself. So we not apply so much violence in daily basis. A legitimate authority does not have to reinforce itself most of the time. So people will comply in a voluntary way. So and this is a different way to exercise power. And we understand that this relationship as something that's as a dialogue relationship and as a dynamic process. So there must be continuous cultivate. A relationship between power holder and citizen is not stable. It's something that is part of a continual process. So you should not assume that legitimacy is something that is won or is guaranteed. It's always something that has to be negotiated between the parties, the parties in the relationship. So the results to be, it's like a perpetual dialogue between power holders and citizens. And so from the empirical point of view, in our research, what we do, how do you translate that complicated concepts into reality? So one of the main challenges is actually how to measure that. Legitimacy as a concept, which components, how do we measure such a complex concept? And also, what are the predictors of legitimacy? Is related to the way the authorities act, how they deliver service, how they perform, how they allocate resources. What are the things that make people recognize an authority as a legitimate authority, the authority who has the right to exercise power? And what are the consequences of legitimacy? It leads to compliance. It leads to cooperation with the authority and with the laws. And also how this relation could vary considering social demographic and spatial perspectives. And which other factors may influence the relationships, like the contact with institutions? People who have less or more contact with, because this may affect the way they see the institutions or the authorities. Fear, if the people fear the authorities or have fear in general, how this could affect these perceptions, victimization, and perceptions of misconduct of the authority, and also the wide political context. So we're taking all this into account to conduct our surveys and to explore this theme. And Renan, we're going to talk a little bit about that now.
Thank you, Ariadne. I know how hard may be explain a theoretical framework in only 10 minutes. I hope you have got the main idea of what we are doing here from the theoretical point of view. When Professor Lorena invited us to talk about our data set, we thought that would be interesting to share with you some of the challenges we faced until we could get our data, and that's some of the presentation I'm going to give to you. I'm going to deliver some information about the lines of research, the stages we followed to develop our data collection tool, and some of these challenges, and finally, I'm going to bring you an overview of our data sets. Okay, it's not. This point of view on legitimacy is not very popular in our field of studies here in Brazil. So when we decided to study legitimacy from this point of view of the quality of the contact between citizens and some of the key authorities in the society, we found that we should produce our own data. We could not count on secondary data from other institutions. So what I'm going to tell you is a little bit about the history of the last few years in NEVE until we got this data set. We are approaching the legitimacy problem following three different but complementary lines of research. The legal socialization one is a study focused on the process by which adolescents develop their perceptions and attitudes toward legal authorities. And this study is seeking to identify how the socialization processes, the different socialization processes, may shape their behavior toward legal authorities. It's a complex framework which includes the role of the family, the teachers, and the peers. I'm a little bit suspect about this one because it's the one I'm working with. So it's the best. The second approach is what can be called the audience legitimacy. It's focused on how citizens from different social backgrounds in São Paulo experience some of the main public services, including their contact with civil and military police forces, some of the municipality services, and the contact with authority figures from the judiciary. Here is, for our research, is really important to consider how many cities can be within the only city that is São Paulo. Marcelo is going to talk a little bit more how we managed to introduce the heterogeneity of the city in our research. And finally, the third line of research can be considered the other side of the legitimacy equation, because it's focused on what the authorities think about their own work. It means the main objective of this line of research is to understand how public authorities perceive their work, how their duties, and how it affects their self-legitimacy. In this line of research, we're considering civil police and military policy, and judges as well. I cannot manage too many things. I think Ariadne made clear that this is only one research with different lines of approach. So what I'm going to tell you about the stages of research development can be considered equal or mainly equal or almost equal to all the three lines. Of course, they didn't begin at the same time, but it took at least 2 years between the first and the last step, or the most recent step of data collection. If these three lines of research share a same general theoretical framework, the development followed the same first step. That is the same first step of any research we have ever made, anyone have ever made in this room. That is the literature review. From the literature review until the first wave of data collection, we took at least 2 years. Some of our main core concepts like the ones who is evaluating the quality of the contact with the authorities, have never been applied in Brazilian context, as I have just mentioned. So it was fundamental to our research to count on the assistance from a portion of international experts that we invited to visit our installation and to talk with us about what we've just seen in the literature review. We could count with experts from England and United States who helped our team to understand how to develop our own measures, but at the same time be able to produce comparisons internationally reliable. Here we are facing a problem that is really specific to our kind of research, because to do a comparison between Brazilian police forces and Brazilian police behavior with England is not an easy task, because the formation of the police forces is completely different and how they behave is completely different. So we could count with this expert help to formulate a design that could be comparable. In these stages, I would also highlight one thing that is important to students, I believe, to know how many drafts we've made before the final survey. And why is it important to have so many drafts? Why is it important to do so many pre-tests before the final survey? In the track to the final survey, we discovered things such as, for example, it's important to be aware of the length of your survey. For example, my research, the research I'm working with, we're asking children from 11 years old tricky things. If they have ever seen a police officer beat up someone, for example. With field work, with our ethnographical experience, we could realize that we cannot apply a survey that length more than 30 minutes to children, as we cannot apply a survey with more than 3 hours to an adult. So the importance of so many drafts before our final survey. This is some of the stages. I'm not in detail of any of all those, because what is important is what is to come. Some of our challenges. I've just mentioned the length of the questionnaire. How to measure things that are not observable. In my class today, we talked a little bit about this latent variables. How it's one thing to count events. It's another thing to measure attitudes. We had to learn how to measure attitudes, which analytic model would fit best to our kind of data. We have also sensitive questions, as I've mentioned, but we have a victimization set of questions. So you have to be really careful on how you're going to ask adults or children about these kind of sensitive questions. We had to translate lots of concepts from this international literature review, and it's not easy to translate, because you cannot only translate the language, you have to translate the context where kind of things happens. Challenges concerning the field work. So, for example, for this community or audience legitimacy sample, we realized there is several problems of contacting people from wealthy neighborhoods, because they're probably working or they don't want to talk with the team who's collecting the data. That third line of research, the civil servants research, or the self-legitimacy, the one which is collecting data with authorities. The team responsible for this research have made lots of efforts to guarantee the allowance to contact the police officers. So we had to go lots of time to the public security office and ask permission to enter the places where they are working, to ask permission to the officers to respond. The same happened with legal socialization students, the children students, the adolescents. We had to subscribe our research to the University Ethical Committee. Then we had to elaborate a form of consent to their parents. And another problem that we still, the last challenge I would like to highlight is the one we are still facing. I forgot to mention that it's a longitudinal design. What it means that we are collecting data each year, or at least one time a year, with the same persons. So I want to ask a kid about their relationship with police in 2016 and 2017. How do I guarantee that this participant will engage in all our waves? So it's a challenge to guarantee the engagement. We have to contact them frequently. We have to spam emails to them. We have to ask them to participate. And finally, this is an overview of our data sets. Here are represented the 3 different lines of research. The legal socialization and the audience legitimacy can be considered longitudinal, so we have already 2 waves of data collection collected between 2016, 2015, and 2017. And the civil servants, the last one, the other side of the legitimacy equation, is not longitudinal, but is working with at least 3 different data sets. What we find in our data set, well, we have samples from the legal socialization study, different samples, not too different because we had a good attrition rate. I don't know if you can see, can you read? It's hard to read a little bit because it's the color. Yeah, we have a center visit this afternoon. We can talk a little bit more about the data set in detail. So I'm going to give an overview. We have different strategies of sampling. For example, for the legal socialization, we decided to model a sample of schools, and then from schools, contact the students, because we could not have a map of where children from 11 years old would be living. So we had this probability proportional to size method to define a sample of public and private schools. Then we random selected in each school the participants. The audience legitimacy has 2 samples with data collected in 8 different areas of São Paulo. Is that point I've told Marcelo is going to talk a little bit more about the heterogeneity of the city. And due to permission matters, the police officers and were recruited in a convenience sample. We have different ways of collecting data. These 2 are face-to-face interviews, and the other one is self-applied. And the issues, I think, is the more important. What kind of issue do we have in our data sets? In the legal socialization, we're going to find variables about their relationship with their families, the role their peers have in their own perception of the world, legitimacy, the legitimacy of the parents, the legitimacy of the teachers, legitimacy of police, interpersonal trust, perceptions of law, fear of the city and victimization, and also social demographic profile. In the audience legitimacy, we have measures of neighborhood perception, their contact with city hall, social capital, interpersonal trust as well, fear and attitudes towards violence, lots of things that you can see there. And the last one, we have democracy and human rights, management of police forces. We talk with police officers about the mortality situation. What is important here is that there is some core concepts that we are measuring basically the same in the 3 different data sets, because our plan is at the final of our research have some comparison between these 3 lines. So the legitimacy and procedural justice that it's a concept we haven't explained it here, but it's related to the contact with police, is some of the variables you're going to find in the different data sets. Now Marcelo is going to talk a little bit more about the secondary data and other research lines we've been dealing with.
So, a good way to understand the challenge of this academic project is to think about the study area. So, this is our study area, São Paulo City. The city contains a large number of the specificities. And an example of these specificities can be found in this map. Here is São Paulo. Here's this dark blue spot is São Paulo in 1881. In that moment, São Paulo had a population of 50,000 people. Now we will take a look at the urban expansion. In the 1920s, we had 580,000 inhabitants in the city. In the 30s, São Paulo approached 1 million people. In the 1950s, São Paulo exceeded 2 million people. Here, almost 3 million people. Here, it's important to highlight that the urban violence, mainly homicide, becomes a serious social problem in that time. We see the range of the time in each color. So in the 1980s, we had 8.5 million residents in the São Paulo city. Here, the illegal occupation of the environmental protection area was consolidated. In the 90s, we had 9.6 million of residents in the city. And here, finally, we have more than 10 million people in the city. However, the city is not only distinguished by this fast growth. Another fundamental factor is the spatial temporal heterogeneity of the city. Please see the map below. This map shows the density of homicides in São Paulo in 1999. Places in white color did not register occurrences. In red, the places with the highest densities of homicides. 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The first one, 1999, more than 5,000 people are murdered intentionally in São Paulo. In this map, the last one, about 100 people, 100 homicides in São Paulo in that year. You know that both qualitative and quantitative research heterogeneity can be a problem. The idea was to differentiate the territory in areas with specific characteristics to help better understand the phenomenon of the interest in the research project, also legitimacy. The methodological answer was to represent the urban patterns. We use most different data from the most different sources and gather this information in AGIS, Geographic Information System. Most of this information is gathered in 1980 to 2010 and applied about 19,000 census sectors of the city. Each one of these parts is a sector. So, expansion of urban area, one of the most important variables, population patterns, crime patterns, demographic characteristics, use and occupation of the territory, road network. So, we use statistical procedures to determine the special parts of the city. Statistical analysis, factorial or analysis of cluster. And we found these results. We found 8 urban patterns in São Paulo. The first one, in Jardim Paulista, there's the characteristic to be commercial and services area in that place. Here is Paulista Avenue. Another one is Vila Matilde, residential area and consolidated urbanization. Vila Andrade, there's a radial urbanization. This area represents the richest people in São Paulo. Pirituba, some dispersed residential development. Cidade Ademar, irregular housing in all the urban areas. Jardim Angela, famous for the violence in this place. Residential gradual urbanization, ambiental protection areas, and geological risk areas. Iguatemi, irregular housing in the new urbanization areas. And the last one, Grajaú, peri-urban areas also. In these places, the rural characteristic is present today. So, the summary of this work, considering the heterogeneity as one of the most defining characteristics of São Paulo, we assumed that the interaction between citizens and key institutions would vary considerably across regions of the city. In order to understand our function with São Paulo, we proceed a cluster analysis with our census tracts, 1908, 1991, 2000, 2010. After characterized 8 patterns, therefore, I mean representing all cities within the city. The longitudinal panel was performed with the residents of these areas. At present, we are establishing partnerships to extend the understanding of our fractions within São Paulo, partnerships with the Centro de Estudos da Metrópole, Center of the Metropolitan Studies, Centro de Ciências Matemáticas Aplicadas à Indústria, CMEI, Center of the Mathematical Sciences Applied to Industry, and Cidades Globais do Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP, Global Series Project of the Institute of the Advanced Studies of this university. One example is the study in partnership with the CMEI. Here, we have the graphical representation of big data of the robbers in the São Paulo city. The project's NEVE CMEI seeks to employ a large volume of the criminal data that allow describe the variability, the inconsistency of the flows, and the seasonal peaks and the complexity of criminal records in the city of São Paulo. Using the census tracts and the urban patterns of the key areas project as the basic units of the analysis and graphic representations as a way to visualize the behavior of the crimes in the specific places and moments. So, very quickly is this, and Renan Ariadne.
You have 15 minutes. This is our website. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think we still have, I mean, this is the end of the presentation. We try to divide between the data, the primary data, the secondary data. And we still have time for questions. And also we will have time and the end of the afternoon to site visits for anyone who wants to visit our location. We are here inside university, but not in the same building that we are in. It's a little bit far, but it's inside university. And we'll be also there to receive anyone who wants to talk more about the research that we are doing. But I think we still have also time if anyone has question about the object of research or the methodology and everything. Okay.
You were supposed to speak on the mic, but instead of that, they're going to repeat the question.
Okay, so I think I have to say that in the mic. The thing is, to everybody be able to listen, you have to use the microphone, but we don't have like audience microphone. So you make the question, I repeat the question, and then everybody hears.
I think that it's great that you create new data sets, probably make it available to everybody to analyze. And I have a question according to the data collection process. So you're working with quite sensitive topic on violence, and as far as I understand, you use face-to-face interview and secondary data keys and so on. But you know, when the topic is sensitive, there is a huge difference between data collected from the face-to-face surveying and internet surveying. And usually in the internet, people in these situations are more open and feel more secure to talk about problems with police and so on. So did you apply different strategies of data collection, and did you make comparison between these two types of sources?
So I'll try to to manage. So she was asking about the methodology and how we handle the sensitive questions of our questionnaire. We do sensitive questions, especially to the kids, who is like a big challenge, and also to the residents of the São Paulo city. So she was asking how we handle that, and because most of the time people could not be like honest about some of the things because they don't feel comfortable to talk about it in sensitive questions. So if we use some different approach, like because most of our data sets are collected with face-to-face interviews. So she was saying that maybe if we try to like self-apply or maybe use the internet as a source also to collect this kind of data. So I think I can talk a little bit about that, and Renan also, because it's the research that we work on. I work in the audience legitimacy, the research with the residents of the city of São Paulo. So no, we didn't try. We didn't do anything online with our research. It's always of the face-to-face household interviews. And because we have like two data sets, I don't know, I think Hannah didn't talk about that, but we have one that is representative of the city as a whole, and also we have samples in the 8 key areas that Marcelo presented in here. So in the key areas, we are doing a panel study. We go back to the same interviews. So we are very worried about be precise in our sample and make sure that we are like talking to real people and make sure that we can represent the diversity of the city. So when you talk about areas there, not everybody has access to not only internet, but use like in daily basis, but also like we have like people who don't even know how to read in our city. That's why we use face-to-face interview. To us is to make sure that all questionnaires are understand or are received to the interviews as in the same manner. So we still have a huge gap of education and even to be to understand this kind of thing. So it's a problem. It could be a problem. But we still are doing this kind of questions. So what our strategy is to start with more like light questions, especially when you talk about victimization. We start with light questions, like things that are not that hard, and then we move to more like other experience. And we measure not only like direct victimization, but also indirect victimization. So if you ever have, if you ever seen like something, if you ever had a person that is related to you that suffers from something, so it's a way to start to talk about things and then move from what the interview really experience in daily lives. But yeah, we could have problem. One of the things that we consider to do is like in these questions, give the tablet to the person who is responding to respond themselves. But because of the illiteracy, the people who don't know how to write and read, we could not make sure that everybody was getting the same stimulus. So that's why we choose not to do it. So, and also because we have like some of the people who are like kind of older, and they don't they could not be that comfortable with the tablet and responding questions on the, so we have to make choice. That's it. We lose in some ways and we can gain in other. The choice that we make is try to make sure that everybody is receiving the questionnaire and the stimulus in the same way.
Hello, it's working. We discussed that a lot between this legal socialization team who is conducting research with adolescents, because it seemed that it would be more problematic to talk about this kind of topics, issues with adolescents. We have, for example, questions about victimization at home, at school, bullying. We thought a lot on this problem. We realized that we could not apply in Brazil a self-reported survey with 11 years old, because they could not understand this illiteracy problem Ariane just mentioned. We thought about scales, more friendly scales with labels, and that could not work to us either. So if you were pointing that we may have bias in these questions, it's an important thing. We may have in the future, I don't know how plausible is this, to apply to when they are older, to a specific sample of this subsample, and compare if it's really the case, if they are really reporting more violence when they're not in the presence. What we have done to try to soften this problem was to train the research team who was collecting to pay attention if the children were uncomfortable, to jump the question if it would not be a problem if they didn't want to question. But it may be a source of bias, of course.
And she's asking about the maps, and with the huge drop of homicide that we have here in São Paulo in the last decade, who is like a phenomenon that we still trying to understand, actually. But if that repeats, the same drop is repeating other kind of other patterns of crime or just in homicide. So I think that's the question for Marcelo, because it's his field of knowledge.
São Paulo is a case like New York or Bogota in Colombia. Only the homicide reduce the rates in this moment. Another things are like robberies or rapes, and the level is the same for decades. And there's a lot of the works to try to expand this, but there's no conclusion yet about the reasons for this drop, the rapid drop of homicide in São Paulo.
I don't know if you're from Brazil. We have lots of problems with public data on this issue. It's of reliability. I don't even know if we have something about bullying, for example. So it's an issue.
We have time for one extra question. So, anybody? Let me know.
So I wanted to thank also, I thought this was very interesting. We always hear NEVE, NEVE, NEVE. But we don't know what is NEVE. Now we have more idea of what it is. So is the data, if students want to work with the data, is it something that's freely accessible and easy to work with? Or how is the protocol of how do you deposit the data in like cease in a data depository, or how accessible is the data that you produce?
Right now, the database that are like collecting this research is not available yet. We are like thinking about, and I was like trying to talk to create like a protocol, like maybe time, I don't know, from 5 years or something like that. We'll have to explore that and then move them to the website. But we don't have a protocol yet. But we do have data from past research, like other surveys that are available with the data that some of the questions are similar. Some apply in the city of São Paulo and others in the Brazil, other capitals, but not this data that we are collect right now, not yet. But we are. This is a team of a discussion with us because we think it's important to make a good documentation. This is something that we are working on and make everything like available and understandable for the people who can use after that.
One of the problems is we're still in a longitudinal study. Depending on the kind of publication someone wants to do with this data, it can compromise other waves. It's improbable that someone will read our papers, but publications in other kind of sources it may be. But we strongly recommend it if there is any student who wants to know more about this data, wants to work with this data. It's easy just to look for NEVE. You're going to attend and going to talk about it. And it's good to work with other people. Would be great.
Hey, someone else? We have, the question was short, the answer also, so we have an extra. Time for an extra question. No? Lina?
Sorry, may I ask another question? Because I'm really interested in the data collection. Quite an issue. For example, now we started to introduce extremely important question to us in Russia, right? Quality of the data gathered, especially from the structured interview, like what you use. So you mentioned Lancet, like this, yeah?
Okay.
So do you use some software to trace your interviews to guarantee the quality and that they're not like repeating and meeting data in the wrong way?
She asked how we do like in the field, and because we mentioned that we're using tablets to collect the data, and she was asking if we are like using some kind of device to make sure that, or some kind of app to make sure that the interview is really there in the spot and everything. And yes. And more than that, because of that, we find out some errors and we make the company to correct them. So it was not because we have like the sample in the key areas, the areas that because we have two sources, because we have the one that represents the city of São Paulo, the other in the key areas. And the key areas are very limited in space. So the interview is supposed to only make the interviews inside the key areas in selected places, and that was random select and everything. And then after the questionnaire come back to us, we find out that some of the questions were made outside the area that we delimited. So we make them come back. And because we have like the geographic pointing to, we know exactly where the questionnaire was made. There is other question that, the other issue that we didn't we didn't use, but there is a possibility also to record some of the interview to make some verification after, to make sure that everything that they really actually talk to someone, and because of problems sometimes we have like in our questionnaire is a survey, most of the questions are closed, but we have 4 open questions, and they are like very important questions to us, and we can like we didn't use that because of consent problems. We didn't because we didn't know the company was going to record it. They don't only do that for their own use, but when we asked them, but they didn't give us, because in the next time we're gonna try to give consent to record some of the, especially the open ones, because we could have like some doubts about the transcription of that open questions. So this is another way that you can like control and maybe improve the quality of your data. Not only make sure that the people went there, but really, if you want to, just to verify some of the questionnaires like random, just to make sure that the quality is okay, you can maybe listen some of the interviews. So.
Okay, then. I would like to thank you, NEVE's team, Marcelo, Ariadne, Renan, Professor Marcos Alvarez. Thank you very much for being here, for the very interesting presentation. I think we know more about NEVE, something that we heard all the time, about the good job that you're doing. I'd like to thank you, all of you, for being here. And remember, tomorrow we're going to have a late afternoon seminar with Guy Wheaton. It's going to be good for you to be here. It's going to be another very interesting presentation. Okay, thank you very much for all of you.
Combinou, né?
Valeu.
Obrigado. A gente não combinou como fazer com as pessoas que querem. Eles anotaram lá.
Então, aí tem que perguntar. Eu
eles
também
anotaram,
não sei.
eu dei
Tem
uma
uns
olhada
nomes.
já, a gente só não combinou como ir até lá.
Então, eu não sei como vai fazer. Tem que ver com o pessoal da secretaria se
eu
eles
falo
sabem
eu
algum
avisei
jeito.
lá que a gente vai estar aqui às 18 horas, e se alguém perguntar...
Às 18. Então, às 18.
Eles têm uma lista,
agora,
a gente só não
8
combinou
da noite.
que hora se encontrar, mas eu
18,
oriento eles
pelo amor de Deus.
que às 18 a gente vai estar aqui embaixo e vai junto.
Aí eles deveriam mandar um e-mail, não?
Ah, it's gonna
É porque hoje, né, não sei se... Talvez as pessoas vejam, mas estão em...
We're gonna meet in the lobby, and then the group is going to all together. Yes.
Tá.
Is on the
Vou
other
orientar.
side of the campus, just on that street. Just walk all the street all the way down, and then yes. So it's a little before, so okay.
Nem eu que imaginar. Eu olhei e falei, nossa, não acredito, ainda bem que eu vim. Tinha nome, não, no papel. Que legal. Eu vi você ali, mas eu falei, tipo...
Será?
É.
Eu também olhei a mesma coisa, falei, será? Mas tão parecida, não pode ser tão parecida. Eu falei, não imagina. Muito legal, cara.
Boas aulas. Valeu.
Isso aí que a aula de agora é fundamental para analisar esses dados.
Eu tive a impressão que ninguém da minha turma veio pra cá.
Sala. Mas assim, o público varia. Esse é um público bom, assim, porque depende, cara, do horário da tarde. Assim, não, flutua pra caramba. Não, mas flutua pra caramba. Teve o Dedu que veio falar do Research Fund, tinha menos gente. Então isso. Aí quando os caras foram dar dicas sobre o que fazer na pós-graduação, aí tá lotado. Né?
O financiamento ainda não é uma preocupação para ele.
Então, e aí vai isso, assim, então a gente fala. Enfim, o apelo realmente muda e depende da turma, quer dizer, se deve a aplicação do que vem, o público é outro, não dá pra saber o tamanho, mas assim, isso aqui tá, assim, a gente fica super satisfeito. 40 pessoas, assim, tá ótimo.
A gente poderia ter trazido os pepinos que tem nos bancos de dados para resolver.
Também. Pra falar, né? Às vezes já vira aprendizado dos caras. Olha só, super legal a apresentação, eu gosto merda aqui. Você sabe que você tá falando isso de confiabilidade, trabalhava na FETAC, o Escola Live, você faz um índice de perspectiva de humor, né? Do comércio. Eles ligavam para as companhias de comércio, para as empresas de comércio, perguntar para eles, comparado com o ano passado, como é que tá agora, como é que vai ser o futuro, aquelas coisas assim super. Não, 3 perguntas. E aí, e um menino, aluno da escola, começou a ele a responder. Só que aí o cara que cuidava, um puto estatístico bom, assim, o econometrista, ele pegou. Porque ele falou, não pode assim, mudar desse jeito que tá acontecendo. Não. E o moleque não ligava, você pediu a conta da escola, falou, dá a conta do telefone que eu quero ver se ele ligou.
Fácil.
E o cara desligou. Aí foi um escândalo, moleque, o moleque foi expulso da escola.
Eles fizeram, eles colocaram dado fora da área da pesquisa, isso foi um problema sério, etc e tal, mas foi possível de descobrir, assim, não é que eles inventaram a entrevista, mas eles extrapolaram o campo.
É mais fácil fazer ali, vamos ali, né?
Exatamente. Então isso a gente tem que ir vendo e pegando, porque de fato, ainda mais quando você trabalha com uma empresa
Tá bom. Claro.
um gasto gigantesco para fazer um survey, então você tem que ficar que nem
Controlando.
fazendo visita.
E até explicar pra eles o que é viés, né?
Não, os entrevistadores sabem.
Não, então.
Mas eles sabem que não estão ligando a questão.
Ah, bom, sim. O quanto aquilo importa pra gente.
Go to the information session? Good? Derek, Professor, do you know the password? No.
Is it locked? Try the same.
The
same login.
Oh, the same.
Looks like it works.
Yeah.
Well, good evening.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, I'm sorry. I'm going to present to you Pedro's research design. Obviously, like everybody else's research, it's being developed. So any kind suggestions or on the weak parts or compliments about the strongest ones are very welcome. So first of all, I'd like to emphasize his research question, which is how Brazilian left-wing government took so long to be punished by credit rating agencies. The fact that literature expects is that with a left-wing party leading the government, the Brazilian government, the credit rating agency punishes punishes the government and downgrades the country's rate. Theoretically, credit rating agencies are now left-wing friendly, so left-wing governments have a very different preferences from the financial market. But Pedro's research is trying to establish that Brazil is a deviant case, so he wants to dig deeper to realize if the literature is right or wrong about Brazil. So he believes that in Brazil from 2002 to 2014, the left-wing party leading the Brazilian government actually produced a stabilized a rating stability or an improvement of the grade. Then, as you can see in the pictogram, his X is the left-wing party leading Brazil, and the first step is before the election, but I'm going to talk about these later. So his Y is the rating stability or the rating the rating improvement. So to open up this path between X and Y's, he established during this initial step of his research that there are two important entities acting on the causal mechanisms, which are credit rating agencies and left-wing government. So we should answer what are they doing and why. To picture it, let's take a look on the pictogram. So the first step indicates that the left-wing party is about to win the presidential election. And then the second step, with a big probability of the left-wing winning the presidential election, a credit rating agency worries, and then they indicate undergrade. So the third step establishes that the left wing was aware about it. So they worries about a financial crisis also. So they published a very important public letter to announce their commitment to maintain the macroeconomic policy that attends the
the credit rating agencies that attends to the credit rating agencies. So the next step after this letter, the left-wing party wants the election. They wins the election. So they established the commitment, and Brazil got a sovereign rating that Pedro explained me. It's a better rate.
Investment rate.
Investment. No, the first one is sovereignty, right?
No, sovereign rating is the rating which credit rating agencies attribute to countries. That
to countries, all right.
Rating.
So Brazil reached a sovereign rating. During a left-wing administration, the national political agenda created a stressed situation with the credit rating agencies' preferences. So the credit rating agencies started to announce the possibility of downgrade once again the Brazilian grade. Then the left-wing administration planned a political conciliation with the credit rating agency, reinforcing their commitment with the credit rating needs. So then, the macroeconomic discipline of Brazil produced an improvement on the national investment grades. And this led to a rating stability. So these were the causal mechanisms that Pedro established for his research design. He intends to use process tracing as a methodological technique to discover step by step if his X is going to produce DYs. So as you can see, the credit rating agencies impose punishment on left-wing government by degrading the country or by constraining the country to detach from its original political agenda. They do that to guarantee the investors' interests. On the other hand, the left-wing party anticipates the credit rating agencies' sanctions by compromising to accept the market discipline or by detaching from its original political agenda to avoid a financial crisis. So as a result, there is a stability or an increase of the Brazilian rating grade. So this is his causal mechanism. It's a draft of his research design using Brazil as a within case. And Pedro can explain it. I think was the most important part of his project. And then he can explain much better than me, of course.
I'm still developing this idea. It's for my proposal research to my master, so there are still a lot of black boxes to be opened, but Nayani explained it really well, the main aspects.
Can you go back to the picture?
What are your cases or cases?
Yeah. This is a case of.
Oh, I know what it's a case of. That's clear.
Okay.
But what would a case be?
The case B.
Yeah.
I'm not pretty sure what this question, what we expect, but the case B.
No, a case. What would a case be?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. This is Brazilian case. I tried to
credit
establish a puzzle because the literature says that credit rating agencies punishes left-wing party at government, but in Brazil, this doesn't seem to be the case, since left-wing party, the Workers' Party,